So we're going to get to the meat of the program here in the next hour and 15 minutes or so. And we're going to teach you some skills that we think you can use in your workplace, that we think you can use possibly in your personal lives or anywhere else. And those skills are the skills of being a conflict coach. To define conflict coaching is really pretty simple, and I want you to gain a clear understanding. And like I say, you've got your PowerPoints in front of you. It's the process of providing support and guidance to staff and how you build their capacity to address workplace conflict situations, right? And most importantly, conflict coaching is about understanding how peer groups within your organization who are on the same level can alleviate conflict. And it can be, can alleviate conflict with customers and maybe as importantly, within the workplace. So how many of you, well, that might be too sensitive a question. Have you ever had trouble in the workplace and it has escalated to the level where we needed a third-party negotiator? Raise your hand if that's happened in your workplace. Not to you necessarily, all right? How many of you have been the subject of a lawsuit as a result of conflict? Raise your hand. Get them up there. Don't be lying to me. I know you got. As assistant principal, here's how it worked in schools. If a kid fell down, mom and dad sued the school board, the superintendent, the principal, the assistant principal, the teacher, the janitor, bus driver, cafeteria worker. Everybody got sued, right? So the bottom line is I believe, that conflict coaching can keep conflict from escalating to where we even need a third-party negotiator or mediator, right? That's the goal here. That's what we're trying to really be a part of. So the goals of conflict coaching are really fairly simple. We want to analyze the situation that causes the conflict, right? What is doing this? Why is it that I've had three administrative assistants quit and move on to other positions in the last 7 months? Why is that? I know, they'll leave for 50 more cents. I know. And you're right, the economy's nuts. It's crazy. You can't get a Purdue graduate. You can't get one. You better start now for 2021 and give them a co-op because they all have jobs. Every one of our students in any engineering or technology field, even in my field, which is human resources and organizational development, they're all hired. So I agree with you. But the other piece is what's going on internally. Somebody chooses to, well, let me ask you this. Let me flip it on you. How many of you have ever stayed at a job where you knew darn well you could make more money, but you liked it there? Raise your hand. Isn't that interesting? You know, money in surveys across the board in terms of organizational leadership, money is 3 or 4. It's important, don't get me. You know what's number 1? I like it. I like my work. I'm engaged in my work. I'll work for less money, right? I'll work for less if I like my work and I like my workplace. That's 1 and 2, all right? So I'm a little off on a tangent. Goals of conflict coaching include, why is this happening? Why are we having people move on? Why are people yelling at each other? Why did somebody put a bad thing in someone else's lunch? Why? Why? I could go on with the examples. I hope it's never happened in your workplace, but sometimes it does. It helps staff visualize improved relationships and situation. It helps staff understand it doesn't have to be like this. It does not have to be conflict-oriented in the organization. We're working on it. We're going to fix it. Because how many times you go into a boss and they said, oh, just deal with it. Just deal with it. It'll get better. Maybe they tell you, don't worry about it. I'm on it. And you're not on it. They're not on it. And it doesn't get better, and it festers. And it festers, and it festers, and then it explodes. And we've talked about that earlier. Conflict coaching has a goal of inquiry, right? Where you vision possible approaches to address and improve the situation. It's not just, it'll get better, don't worry about it. It's, what are our goals? We've analyzed the situation. Now, how do we make it better? Specific steps, right? It helps the conflicted identify best strategies for addressing that conflict. It teaches applicable conflict resolution skills and provides resources for receiving support. Because conflict doesn't go away. Remember the story about the two kids who fought in high school. I went by the student handbook, gave them 3 days out of school. They came right back in on the 4th day, and they're hammering each other again in the hallway. I just gave you 3 days out. Is that not enough for you? I'm giving you 5 days. I'll give you 5 days of suspension. If you come back and fight again, I'm going to put you in alternative school. What happened on the 6th day? They fought every time. I had more kids going to, and I said, this is crazy. We can do better, right? So what are the skills? What are the conflict resolution skills that we can provide? And what are the resources we can provide for those skills? And then we got to practice a little bit. We're going to practice a little bit today and have a little fun with you. So those scenarios that Cheryl asked you about earlier, those things that cause you stress, that you believe cause conflict, either personally or interpersonally, we're going to work with those, right? And we're going to see how you use our conflict coaching skills that we're going to share with you in a minute, and we're going to have some observers see what they shared and see if there's congruence there, right? And then what is the support? And the key to effectiveness is to facilitate a process by which individuals make decisions for themselves. The bottom line is the principal can't say, all right, you guys cut it out, or I'm going to have to give you 3 days suspension. All right? And everybody in here who works with employees, you have a hammer. We know that. This isn't about that. This is about not using the hammer. This is about putting that employee handbook away and actually working with human beings so that they become the key to the conflict, right? So I want you to take a look at this graph here. This is really kind of the overall concept of conflict coaching. In conflict in the workplace, you know, the first line of defense is just to maintain a conflict minimal environment, that you're communicating, that you're talking, and the opportunities for building conflict capability are really significant if you've maintained a conflict neutral or conflict minimal environment. And there are some things you can do as a leader to make sure that happens. We're going to talk about them here in a second. The second line of defense in terms of building conflict capability in your organization is to build capacity in the workforce. Remember that little mentoring program I talked to you about, the little judicial thing? We had teen court, if you will. That really worked. And you know what I found in that, by the way? Teenagers will whoop your butt. You know, yeah, we ought to cut off his finger. Did he stole a lunch? Cut his hand off like the Muslims. No, Bobby, we can't, you know, there's a lot of things we can do. You can't be walking out here with no fingers. He won't steal again. I know he won't. He'll be stealing with his foot. I know, Bobby. So they always wanted, you know, the judicial system that we created at Jeff High, the judges always seemed to want to do way more than I would have done. You know, they had a little bit of idea of what they could do. And once we kind of shared with them some conflict coaching skills, they had a better understanding of, well, maybe let's talk about, why'd you steal the lunch? I was hungry. You were hungry. Yeah, I stole the lunch because I was hungry. My dad's laid off. Mom's sick. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. I was hungry. Really? Do you have no money? No, I don't have a job. I told you my dad's laid off. Matter of fact, we're living in a car right now, around the corner. Really? Now we're analyzing. Now we're having an understanding of how to get to the root of the issue. The issue is not that a child steals lunch and what would I do as assistant principal? 3 days out, 2 days out, detention. Don't do it again. Get to the root of the issue, right? I stole the lunch because I'm hungry. When you build capacity in the workforce, and I'll give you one on the capacity issue as well, and this is just Jeff High. Monty knows, okay? As assistant principal at Jeff High, I was there for 3 years. I confiscated 2 weapons. One weapon was in the building to be sold. It was a .38 special, had no issues. That was an easy one. The second weapon was a loaded 9mm with capacity, and if that boy with that 9 would have found that other boy, he'd have shot him dead right in our hallway. Thank God we found him in the morning. You know how I knew that that boy had that 9mm? Kids told me. Kids told me. Listen to the whispers so you do not hear the screams. In your organization, listen to the whispers so you don't have to hear the screams. Kid told me. I'm telling you, I won't say the name, of course, he's got a 9 and he's going to shoot. Now, that kid trusted me because I had developed relationships with as many kids as I could. So you've got to do that in your organization. That's level 2. Second line of defense, building capacity in the workplace, which is based on trust, communication, and doing the right thing at the right time for everybody involved, right? Third line of defense, now we're getting into where you don't control it. This is where we get out of individual control. And it's interesting, everybody or most of you on that abortion case, personal responsibility. Personal responsibility, Charlie. She did that. Well, then you have personal responsibility to solve your conflict, right? Since you're so personally responsible. Don't be going to a judge. Don't be calling the cops. Don't go to your supervisor. You solve it. You're all about personal responsibility, right? Now, I'm not. I may sound condescending, but it's a pretty clear answer to me. If everybody's personally responsible, why would you ever go to a third party to solve conflict? Right? Think that over really hard for a little bit. Why would you ever need a third party to solve conflict? Do it yourself. We're going to give you some tools to help out. You've really lost control by the fourth line of defense. It's out of your hands at this point. Last 2 lines of defense, you rely on internal institutional processes, right? The assistant principal and the handbook. And the last one, now we're external. You filed suit. How many of you ever sued anybody? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's okay, I'm just asking. Just because you sued somebody doesn't mean you're a bad person. You know? And when it gets to that point, it's over, right? It's out of your hands. Now you're in a system. My thought, our thought, is that it is best to do it at the source in the organization. Okay? So, Charlie, my workforce is crazy. These people cannot be conflict coaches. They yell at each other all day long. They're always, or there's passive-aggressive behavior, attacks on chairs, bad things in lunches. My people couldn't possibly be conflict coaches. Yes, you could. Yes, you could. HR professionals, managers, leaders, the third one's the most important, peer groups. And that's what we're going to concentrate a little bit on today. But as managers, you know, it's kind of up to you to create that workplace and to provide those skills both to peers, HR managers, other supervisors in your office, right, who can play that role as conflict coach. Now, some people, some organizations are large enough to have specific roles. Ombudsman's an old term that probably was from my campus days, but you have equity officers for the city or the county. You have advocates for, especially for, I'll give you my example in K-12, special needs kids, right? Every kid on an IEP, which is an individual education plan, has an advocate for that person, and that's okay. Mediators, those folks can be conflict coaches. They can add this to their repertoire. I am not suggesting that as supervisors you go out and hire 3 conflict coaches, all right? I'm not silly. You don't have it in your budget, and you're never going to get it in your budget. I can see that ask. County commissioners, I'd like to hire 2 conflict coaches. Okay, next. I can hear that. Boom. So that isn't going to happen. I get it, right? There are some limitations for who can be a conflict coach. Supervisors, be careful. You can't do it all. Maybe you're the source of the conflict and you don't know it. Maybe you're intimidating. Maybe you're larger than life. I've been called a bulldozer. Cheryl prefers earth mover now, right? But if I'm the guy in the office that is, running around and trying to fix everything and bulldozing, right? I can't be the conflict coach. I have my style. Unless you're willing to make changes, as Cheryl left you with, right? Either use the stop method or the 4 areas she talked about. Unless you're willing to do that as a supervisor, empower your staff to be conflict coaches, right? And sometimes you're an ultimate decision maker in the organization, and it's tough for you to serve as a conflict coach in there. Cheryl's going to pass around some books. There's a fairly large field of conflict coaching. Probably the most of what I've used today is from Wilmot and Hocker. How'd you like to have that last name? I know. I've met him, Bob Hocker. So wonderful. Okay, I'm joking. Have a little fun here. He's a wonderful man. I love to make fun of him for his last name. It's Hocker. So Wilmot and Hocker are the interpersonal conflict experts, and you can, don't steal my books. There will be conflict. Don't steal my books. 4, I'll get 1 back. I've had these things before, these county people. Anyway, no, I'm joking. If you really want one, you can take a copy or whatever. They're not very expensive, $30. So Wilmot and Hocker really talk about interpersonal conflict and those 5 roles, those accommodating roles, kind of the way you manage conflict. That's that book. Noble has developed something called conflict management coaching. He has a thing called the synergy model. And he would be happy for a small fee to come into your organization and talk about the synergy model and how it might be used for peer groups, right? I would also work with you a little bit if you really think you need that. And there are other consultants that can work that, teach for Purdue or IU or whatever. My buddy Dan Griffith and Cliff Goodwin have created what's called the Conflict Survival Kit. It's a cute little book, and it's floating around here. And then, of course, Cheryl Neal and I, we call her the satin hammer. I'm the bulldozer. We have created this issue of conflict coaching. So, conflict coaching
and we practice very well.
I'm sorry?
And we practice very well.
And we practice. This is our first gig together, and we're figuring it out. So essentially, conflict coaching and other coaching fall into 3 forms. And I want you as a supervisor and a leader of your organization to think about these 3 ways that we coach people. The first way is performance coaching, okay? Think about learning keyboarding in high school. Remember the performance coach? Did everybody take keyboarding in high school or typing? Everybody did. I took typing, you took keyboarding. I literally learned on a typewriter. At 61, I'm proud of that. I can crank out an old Royal. And I started on a manual, and then they redid the lab, and I got electric Royals. Oh, they were so nice. And I was typing like a crazy man, and you couldn't read 1 word of it. Because I thought my fingers were fast, but you couldn't read it. So that's performance coaching, right? I'm going to teach you ASDF on the left, and what is it, JK? What's the right hand? JKL semicolon. This is where we start. And you performance coach, right? You time people. They do certain things. It's hard. You got to lift for the Z. And that's a performance coach. So that's okay, all right? You can use it for life coaching, career planning, major setbacks. I've had a major setback, and I'm doing some grief counseling as we speak. My wife of 32 years died very unexpectedly about 9 months ago, 10 months ago now. And so I get that kind of coaching, right? I get that kind of life coaching. Executive coaching. This is kind of, I would guess, this is what we're doing today. Most of you are elected officials, which means you're executives. You're responsible for something. How many of you have the power to fire? Raise your hand if you can fire somebody. Raise them up high. I want to know. All of you. Okay? If you have the power to fire, you're an executive. How many of you want to fire someone right damn now? Every one of them. It's unbelievable. Best way I've found is to text them. Your ass is fired. When I get back, clean it out. I know. So, executive coaching, right? I'm trying to help you understand a little bit about your organizational culture and how that ticks and how you don't want to fire them. How many of you think that with a little coaching and maybe a second chance or two, that those people you wanted to fire a minute ago might improve? It's like 3. No, I'm firing them. I know. Thank you, Donald Trump. And I'm going apprentice, although he's fired some in the government too. So executive coaching is how you can better understand your organization. And the last kind of coaching, and this is what I believe you're responsible for, is developmental coaching, right? I want to develop my workforce. I want to give everyone a chance. I want to give everyone the necessary KSAs, knowledge, skills, and some people say attributes, right? Others say activities. I want to give them the necessary knowledge, skills, and attributes to be successful on the job. Because the bottom line is when you fire somebody, it's a pain in the butt. Then you got to hire somebody. Then you got to train them. And then if they don't work out, you're in this vicious, ugly, horrible cycle of firing and hiring, okay? And really no work gets done. And finally, county councilman or whoever your bosses are going, maybe we go back to that whole, issue of conflict management. Remember the first one up there? The traditional view? Maybe we fire you. Maybe you're the problem. If you can't develop your people, if you can't not have conflict in the workplace or at least work through it, you don't have those KSAs, maybe we fire you, right? So those are the 3 kinds of coaching. So here it is in a nutshell. Ta-da! The conflict coaching functions, all right? You have this. I'll be happy to give you more. I only have an hour here. It's much deeper than this, but here's the bottom line. The first thing you do is identify some peers. Not everyone in your organization can conflict coach, cannot. And you may not be able to, but you can certainly lead the initiative. You can set it up, right? And when you do, you have to first establish what we call a coaching relationship. So you'll get 1 or 2 people, and you can lead this. You can take this stuff and lead it. It's not rocket science. This isn't Neil Armstrong, Purdue. This is just figure this out. I know you have people in your organization who can do this, right? So you have an initial discussion with a coach that you've provided some training to, right? That coach has to be willing to participate, and you have to figure out, do they have assets? Do they have liabilities? Are they ready to serve as a conflict coach in my organization? Okay? Then you set, and really you and the coach, the person you've identified, should set context and identify specific needs to be addressed. And this kind of goes back and forth between the coached and the coach, him or herself, right? So it's coach and those who are coached. First of all, what's the primary purpose? And generally, the primary purpose of conflict coaching is to help an individual strategize and develop an action plan. Okay? So I'm off more now on the conflict. So a good conflict coach has got to help a peer or even a subordinate, if you're coaching that way, developmentally figure out what's my action plan. Okay? We know what the conflict is. You got to ask some questions, and we're going to get to that in a second. But ultimately, a good conflict coach has to be able to help others figure out, what do I do about it? It's not enough to talk about it. And sometimes doing nothing is the option. We'll get to that. What is the duration of the coaching? It varies based on the extent of the issue. Is the issue a single incident? Right? Is it a one-time thing? That might be a quick fix. Is it what we call a pattern? Has it happened 3 or 4 times? Or is it systemic? Right? Is it within the organization, the heartbeat of the organization? And you have to figure that out as that organizational leader, but the best conflict coaches have a duration in mind. You don't get coached forever, right? If you do, maybe it is time to get you, maybe this isn't the right organization for you. There should be nature and limits of the coaching relationship. What can the coach do? What can they not do? Kids do this all the time. Daddy, you tell him. Just tell them. You're my dad. You tell them. They'll do it if you tell them. No, probably not. Mr. McGillicuddy is 6'8", played for the Colts. Now, I know his son whipped your ass. You solve the conflict. I'm not going over there. That guy's big, right? That's a silly example, but there should be nature and limits to the coaching relationship. And finally, process for evaluation and reflection after the coaching has taken place. And that can happen during coaching as well, okay? Those are the 4 main relationship values that good coaches do. The most important thing you must do, and something we're going to be looking for here in a moment, as you identify a conflict situation, share it with a conflict coach, and this will be fun. I'm not looking for you to have the KSAs necessary yet, but we're going to practice, all right? One of you at the table is going to identify a conflicted situation. Coach is going to listen and do what we're sharing here in the next 2 slides. The first thing you must be able to do as a conflict coach is to actively listen. Now, all of these bullets will help you, and you have it in front of you. First of all, show interest and be sincere. So when you talk to somebody, your body language means a lot. You got to look them in the eye. Ladies, you've heard this maybe before. Lean in. Lean in, just a skosh. Don't. It's a bad idea. They think you're afraid or you're not listening. Avoid distractions. Excuse me. Did you get that? Did I get how'd that do? Is that good? Did I lose you for just this? Well, of course I did. I'm dorking around with a phone. I've seen professors do that. Are you kidding me? So clear your calendar. Don't turn your phone off. Don't let others knock on your door. We've got work to do. This is real work, right? Now, the most difficult one for me is show empathy. I don't know how that works. You know, a journalist asked my favorite coach, because I'm a bulldozer, Cheryl, Bobby Knight one time, said, Bobby, you didn't seem to have your game face on out there today. Maybe you've seen this clip. And Bobby Knight went, what in the hell is a game face? Is it this? Is it this? And he started, it was the funniest thing. Go online, it's probably still there. So I'm not real sure what showing empathy is.
Can we define that?
But I think Cheryl might be able to help.
Can we define that? It's a soft skill. Some people naturally have a great capacity to show empathy. What can someone share what you think? Hand up. A definition of empathy. Anyone? Over here. I'm on my way.
Okay, to me, it's basically being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to be able to feel and think about possibly maybe how they were feeling and thinking at that point in time.
Absolutely agree. That it's really another one over here.
Putting yourself in someone else's shoes.
And that's really difficult to do. But it is a skill that can be learned. Some people it comes more naturally. There tends to be a difference in genders, often in the capability.
I'm right here. I'm
but
here.
It can be
I'm
learned.
right here, sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's empathy is not sympathy, and particularly when you're dealing with people that report to you or you're in a coaching situation, you can empathize, but do not cross the line of sympathy because that's where they get you.
The difference between empathy and sympathy says do not cross that line. Sympathy means, perhaps, that we make the choice to do it for them. Empathy means I'm expressing that I understand what you may be feeling. I may not feel it, but I think I understand what you're saying. And a lot of times an empathy response is that very thing. It seems like this is really stressful for you. That's an empathy response. It seems like you have really had difficulty with this. You're really struggling with this. I want to understand how that's affecting you, not telling them what to do about it. Now, that's not coaching. Not telling them what to do about it isn't coaching. And that's one of the gender differences too. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the opposite gender. It's a typical thing a lot of times for many males, I'm not saying all, they're focused on the end result. Okay, this is what you need to do. This is what you should do. How many of you have had that feedback from someone, and how does it feel? Anybody ever had somebody say, well, this is what you should do, when all you're really needing to do.
I have one right here.
What you're wanting? Okay.
Go right ahead.
When your husband said, you're trying to get things done and your husband says, if you would just do this, it would be fine.
And how does that make you feel when I do that?
Squished.
Squished.
What was that response?
Oh. What was that response?
Squished.
Squished. And now she is squished. I hit her in the head with a microphone.
She felt squished. Okay. So,
Squished.
So empathy is about trying to put yourself in someone else's place and trying to understand where they may be coming from, but not, okay, this is what you should do, or I'm going to fix it for you. Some people just jump in there and say, let me take care of it. Well, that's not a good coaching skill either, because then that person's not learning how to handle that conflict on their own. So empathy, it can be learned. So the bottom line there is all the above. You show interest, you listen, and you try to give some feedback, and the next one is then you paraphrase. This is what I think I'm understanding. Not immediately jump to, this is what you should do, and this is what I'm going to do, but try to identify with that person in some way. Make sense?
And if I may, that's why you have to choose the right people in your organization, okay? And despite what Cheryl has intimated, males can make good conflict coaches.
Didn't say they couldn't.
I'm
It may be more challenging.
If you have one in your office, maybe you don't, who can listen and show empathy. And I really like the last two, really. Paraphrasing and giving feedback to check for accuracy, okay? Now, before we do that, though, I do want to talk. And Cheryl, I'm going to ask you to give me some body language cues. So read both verbal and nonverbal body language cues. I'll give you a quick example. Now, I'm going to ask Cheryl to do some things. I'm going to coach, and she's going to see, and you see. But here's a good example. I've seen a lot, I won't pick on anybody here, but I've seen a lot of kids who I call in and I go, now we're going to talk a little bit, and they go, no, I need to talk to you, Jimmy. And they moan. Oh. Jimmy, really, I need to talk with you. We'll talk then, okay? Now, I'm reading that, but I could paraphrase that. I can redo it, but I got to read that physical cue. So, Cheryl, give me the physical cue, any that you want, and let's see if we can identify what she's feeling at this moment in time. Ready? Any physical cue. So, Cheryl, I know there's been some conflict in the workplace, and look at them, yeah. Cheryl, I know there's been some conflict in the workplace.
Not going to talk about it.
So what's she saying to me with this? Talk to the hip. Talk to the hip. I know. Talk to the hip, pal. Okay? And I got to recognize that right away, and I can't go, well, Cheryl, just if you would just do this. She's not going to do that. Right? Eye roll. Do you see the eye? It's hard for you in back, I know. Okay, we're going to try again. You can give me another one. Hi, Cheryl. Really excited.
Hi, Charlie.
How are you?
Good, good.
I'm really, I want to chat with you a little bit today, and I was wondering if you could sit down for me. Now watch what happens when she sits down. So Cheryl, I have some questions for you. How are you feeling about what happened earlier today in the workplace?
A little frustrated. A little frustrated. A little frustrated.
And Cheryl, is there anything I can do to help kind of undo what happened? You know, it was a very difficult situation with the yelling and the screaming, and when you spit on him.
I was really frustrated when I spit on him. I've calmed down a little bit, but the best thing you could do with that guy is fire him.
Is get him done.
Get
right?
it, just get it over with.
So we'll stop here for a second. So humor can work. I do that a lot. Humor can work. Don't spit on him. You can't. Plus, I'd get little kids in there and go, after a fight and go, you don't have a very hard right, do you? You had every opportunity. You had the advantage. When I walked up, what happened to you? And they laugh a little bit, and they just, if you can break the ice, if you can paraphrase, if you can, am I understanding that you're saying this? And we're going to look for these kinds of skills, that direct eye contact, giving feedback to check for accuracy, showing empathy. We want you to exhibit those kinds of skills. Thank you, Cheryl. So you can't be a good coach without being a really good active listener. Here's the process. And here's what we're going to be looking for here in about the next 10 minutes when you conflict coach at your tables. Uncover the story. Uncover the story. That's the first thing, and that takes a while sometimes. So, you all have identified some things that cause you conflict and stress, okay? You may have one word for that. Maybe you're thinking of a... Conflict coaches must begin by uncovering the story, and that is at the perception of the person they're talking to. It may not be the whole story. It won't be. It may not be a true story. But from the perception of the person you're coaching, it's their story, and they're sticking to it. Okay? So first, uncover the story. Second, analyze, 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 as Cheryl has shared with you earlier, right? What are the causes? What's the relative contribution by member versus the other? And you can uncover the story by asking. You can also uncover the story by looking in personnel records. You can also uncover the story by talking to others. It takes a while. We won't do that today. It's a one-on-one. We want to see if you can exhibit some of these concepts, right? And skill sets. But analysis comes 360 degrees. 360 degrees. Analysis is not just, I know what you did, talk to me about it, right? It's look in personnel records, talk to others. It's almost like a police case, right? Second thing, or the third thing, is so how do we want to handle this? After you've uncovered the story, after you've analyzed, and it may seem really intuitive, ask them. So how do you think this should be handled? Ask the conflicted person, the person you're coaching, so what do you think we ought to do? What would you do in this case? Might start there. And then, what do you think we should do? How do you think this should be handled? It'll be really interesting to get that feedback. Doesn't mean, as Cheryl has said, that you have to act on it, but you got to ask the question. Then we select the best or most viable response, and here's where coaching really matters. We implement the skill set and identify skills and strategies to implement that viable response. That's the key, right? This is where good coaches know their people, know they're coached, right, or who they're coaching, and give them some high-quality feedback in terms of, and it's often asking, you don't tell them, it's not woulda, shoulda, as Cheryl has mentioned, it's, so do you think you could? Or what about if we? Or would you be open to, right? Let them develop that plan. Let them develop the skills and strategies to implement the response.
And one of the things that we do in situations like that too, when you're starting to identify the conflict, it's really important to always ask, what have you already tried? Because that tells you a lot. Maybe they haven't tried anything. Maybe they're just so upset, they're up to here. It's number 13, they're going to choke the guy or the female. But ask, what have you already tried? And then you have a baseline to start with. Well, those things haven't worked. What are some other options?
Excellent point. Finally, last two, when you're done with the coaching session, you assess that coach's confidence. Are they able to do this? Don't set them up to fail, if at all possible, right? Look, the bottom line is, here's my plan. I'm depressed. Why are you depressed? Because I can't dunk a basketball. And that resulted in you punching your colleague. Yes, I punched him right in the face because he can dunk. And I figured when I hit him in the kneecap, maybe, that would be an ACL injury for him and he couldn't jump as high. Well, the bottom line is you can't make a plan that says, learn to dunk a basketball. I'm old, I'm fat, I'm 61, I'm never dunking a basketball. I get it, I know that. Some people don't know that. You have to help them understand what they don't know, right? And come up with realistic plans. Do not set those you coach up for failure, okay? And the most interesting thing is support that, right? Support that. So make sure they have the confidence and capability to use the skills necessary to implement the strategy, and that requires maybe additional coaching, right, and other conversations. The conflict coaching is rarely a one-time deal. And then you can figure out pretty quickly whether they do have those skills. You can tell in 2 seconds if somebody's an avoider, okay? All you have to do is tell them, so you're going to confront this person, or no, not confront, that's a horrible word. So you're going to ask this person, and I'm going to bring you in first, the two of you, and we're going to chat a little bit, and then you guys are going to continue the conversation and meet weekly, right? And they'll both go, yeah, mm-hmm. And then they avoid each other like the plague because it wasn't solved. You can figure that out pretty quick, right? So you got to make sure they have the skills. All right. Last but not least, here are your coaching options. There's a spectrum of them, similar to what we just talked about, but when the coach is least involved and the person coached is most in control of the decisions is when the coach is actively listening and affirming. That's active listening. Guiding that person through a process of identifying possible solutions. Just as Cheryl just mentioned, ask them what they've tried. Ask them, you got to dig deep to say, how can we get past this? I know you can be the solution, right? And it requires a lot of digging, man. If you just present possible solutions for consideration, you're moving into the coach being most involved and the person coached being least in control of the decisions. We always want to try to get the person who is being coached, right, in control of their own decision making. And if you're giving them advice, which we've talked about and laughed about, or you solve the problem by stepping in and going to the handbook, then obviously it's out of your hands. So that is the spectrum of coaching options, and the goal, my friends, is the person coached should be most in control of the decisions that come out of this thing, right? And how they're carried out. And you'd be surprised how many people want that to happen, okay? We're going to leave you with this and then put you in groups. Maybe there might be one more. So there are some approaches upon receiving coaching, right? Know this. So what if the person says to you, well, I just want to do nothing? Is that an option? Is it okay to do that? Think back to our conflict approaches. Is it okay to avoid? It is, in certain situations. It's not that important. It wasn't a big deal. It was a one-time explosion or a one-time misunderstanding, and it's okay to do nothing. That's a perfectly viable coaching option. Always remember it. It's in your toolkit, right? Let's receive advice to think about, and let's return later for more coaching before we develop something. Like I said, like I mentioned, coaching is rarely a one-time gig. It takes some effort. It takes some time out of the workday, right, for you to do. So sometimes we can't come to a resolution or a plan right now. You think it over. There are some options you've talked about. Let's meet again in 2 days. We'll see how you're feeling, right? Third opportunity in terms of approaches to continue coaching and developing skills and coping mechanisms. So maybe we've put together a plan, but I'm going to continue to coach you through this and help you as you walk through it, right? Certainly we can confront the individual on our own, and that the coaching relationship remains confidential and unknown to the other person in conflict. And then we can get to suggesting third-party HR resolutions, and this is where it gets out of your control, the human control, right? This is where we lose control. So, the last one is file a grievance and go to the county commissioners and tell them how bad the workplace is. So it is a spectrum of coaching, okay? So what we're going to do now, we are going to ask you, you can get in your same groups, you can form new groups. And what I would ask you to think about is maybe visit another county. So if there's 3 of you from one county, there's Clark County. What's your county? Jasper. Jasper and Clark maybe get together for this, right? See if there's only one of you, then you can figure it out. But if you could get with another county, that might be helpful, okay? I would say the optimal group would be between 5 and 6. You could have more if you want. I don't need 110, like the one. They were never going to come to resolution. And here's what I want you to do. So we have given you, and you have in your handouts, active listening strategies, coaching options, coaching approaches. And what I'd like is this. We might be able to do 2 rounds of it. We'll just see. I want to get you out of here a little early. That's always good for evaluations. What time is it? 3:30. We've got till 4. I'll get you out of here in 20 minutes, max. Maybe 25. I want one volunteer, and Cheryl mentioned this. You've already identified some of your conflictions, right? You've already identified stressors in your life. So I want one volunteer to share their story about why that is a stressor and can cause conflict. I want one volunteer to be the conflict coach, and it should be a peer. And here's what we're looking for. How did they use active listening, or did they? Okay? How did they use the conflict coaching process, which we just talked about and is in your papers, right? How did they use the spectrum of coaching options, and how did they come to a solution and implementation plan, or did they? And if they didn't, that's fine, okay? So we've done about those 4 things in the last 10 minutes, and we are going to ask you to pair up. Observers, what I'd ask you to look for is active listening, and you can go to that page and tick it off. Ooh, he leaned in. That was good. Oh, he paraphrased. Oh, she did this. All right? I want you to look for active listening, what process they used, the spectrum of coaching options, and then the quality of the solution and implementation plan.